Hey everybody, Gormos here with some more Wars on a Tank action. This is some footage I recorded at the last testing session on Sunday. Normally the testing sessions would have been on Saturday, but this week it was moved to Sunday. Anyway, I got a chance to play realistic battles again, and there are a few changes from the last time we got to play realistic battles some time back. In the first clip, which shows my first realistic battle game, I drive a T-28. All the other games are with the BT-7, which turned out to be my favorite tank so far. So, let's take a look at some realistic battle gameplay and what has changed since the last time. Keep in mind of course that this is still an early beta and subject to change. Now, the most obvious difference to the current arcade mode is that you can't respawn, just like in the plain version of realistic battles. You have only one life. And in my personal opinion, I think that's an improvement for the gameplay of ground forces. It makes the combat more exciting if you know you have only one life, and it opens up new routes to flank in a fast tank as the game progresses, since you don't have a constant stream of respawn tanks blocking certain routes. And of course, with no respawns, you get more of a feeling of actually making a difference if you kill a few tanks, in a way you just won't in a game with respawns. Another well-known difference is that in realistic battles you play nation versus nation, so no mixed teams. But we have of course already seen those things when realistic battle mode was available the last time. What they have added this time though, or more precisely removed, is the little cross that told you where your shots will land and that changed color with the likelihood of armor penetration. That is gone, so you have to put a little bit more effort into aiming, and you have to memorize the armor strength of the tank you face to judge how likely it is that your shots will penetrate. The rangefinder in the scope is still there though, so it is easy to figure out the range to the target even if it is not highlighted. I don't know if it will stay in, as I have said it is still early beta, but the way aiming at longer ranges currently works is pretty simple. You aim at the tank and get the range. Then you just use the elevation for this range, which you get from the scale in the optics. If you use the correct elevation for the range, you have a good chance of hitting your target. Now, if the rangefinder won't stay in, it would of course have to be replaced with a range-finding help in the sight itself to judge the range to the target with. And another thing to keep in mind when not having the targeting help like in arcade is getting the elevation wrong will have a larger impact on slower muzzle velocity guns than on higher velocity guns. A slower round travels on a much higher arc towards the target than a faster round. They come in at a steeper angle at higher ranges, while a high muzzle velocity shot has a flatter trajectory. That means that if you fire on longer ranges, with a KV-2 for example, your elevation needs to be more precise to score a direct hit than with a high velocity anti-tank gun. That provides an extra balancing factor for a gun like the KV-2's 152mm howitzer, which was not there when we got to test the KV-2 in arcade mode. Now, another thing that has been removed from realistic battles are the red outlines that surrounded an enemy tank when you were aiming at it. They gave you the ability to very precisely fire on a target that was hidden behind a tree or a bush, and even aim for weak spots. Those outlines are not here anymore. The name tags still are though, but they show up less often in the current version of the game. Again, this is still work in progress and we don't know yet if the name tags will stay in realistic battle mode at all. If you do get a name tag, you can still fire on a hidden target, however it is more difficult without the red outlines and you can of course not directly aim for weak spots. In a lot of situations you're better off changing your position to get a clear line of sight on the target so that you know what part of the enemy tank you're aiming at. And at longer ranges you often don't get the name tags at all. In general, you have to pay more attention to vegetation in realistic mode, and they will influence your ability to aim and see targets. A good hull down position alone won't help you if you can't see out of it properly. So that's a bit of info on how realistic battle mode currently looks like. Overall I would say I really enjoyed playing the realistic battle mode and I hope it will stay in the beta this time. It will be interesting to see how it plays on maps that are designed with realistic battles in mind, as Kuban and Karelia are of course more arcade maps, though I think especially Cavalry also works well as a realistic battle map. Now let's move on to the tank I want to show you in this video, the BT-7 light cavalry tank. And I have to say, from all the tanks I have driven in War Thunder so far, this is my favorite one. I love the speed and mobility it provides. The BT-7 is, with the exception of the BT-7M, the last version of the BT series, if you don't count assault guns based on the chassis. And the BT series itself is based on Walter Christie's tank design using the Christie suspension. Now, Walter Christie was, among other things, a race driver and designed race cars, and his tank design showed his passion for speed. The Christie suspension was designed to allow a tank a much higher cross-country speed than any other suspension could provide at this time, and the tanks Christie designed using this suspension were by far the fastest tanks available at the time. Now, Christie sold a few of his T-3 tanks to the Soviet Union, and there they were developed into the PT series, which led over the BT-2 and BT-5 to the BT-7, which we have currently in the game. The BT-7 is a 30-ton tank, a little heavier than most light tanks of this era, but it is equipped with a 17T aircraft engine that provides the tank with over 400 horsepower, and that gives the tank an unmatched power-to-weight ratio. This, combined with the suspension, gives the tank its exceptional cross-country speed, and even uphill the tank can go pretty fast. So the BT-7 is perfect for flanking, changing your position on the battlefield fast, and the speed also helps you to get in a good forward position at the start of the match sooner than your opponents may expect. And when I talk about changing position, I am not just talking about moving back and popping back up 20 meters to the side, but wide flanking moves that span half the map. This gives this tank the ability to really surprise its opponents by getting into their rear and show up from completely unexpected directions. This works especially well in realistic battles without respawn, because the number of enemy tanks is limited, and once the match is on its way for a while, the routes from the spawn towards the objectives are usually clear, and that opens up more ways to flank an opponent. Now, as far as armor is concerned, the BT is of course on the weaker side, but still okay for a light tank of its era, with a maximum of 20mm at the front and 15 at the sides, and the turret has 15mm at the front and side. So most tanks in the game currently can penetrate the armor at pretty much every range, only the 20mm cannons have trouble with the front at longer ranges. In general, you want to avoid getting hit in this tank, and you have the mobility to do that. Though so far I still often risk shootouts at longer ranges, since realistic battle mode without the aiming help was only recently introduced, and you still have a good chance an opponent will miss his first shots at longer ranges. But I expect that this will change fast as people get used to aiming in realistic battle mode. And then you may want to think about getting out of sight right away when someone is aiming at you in this tank. But I can't be sure about that until I have some more realistic battles played. Now let's move on to the gun, and here the BT-7 shines again. It has a 45mm anti-tank gun, which is a pretty decent armament for a light tank. And with its standard armor-piercing rounds, you have 52mm of armor penetration at 100 meters. Enough to penetrate most opponents' armor at low to medium ranges, with the exception of the Sturmgeschütz 3's front. At higher ranges you have trouble though if the target is angled a bit. You won't be able to penetrate the angled Panzer III at range. Even at shorter ranges, a Panzer III can give you trouble if he angles well, and the Panzer III can angle very well, as it has the same armor at the front and the side. As usual, you get a round to unlock, another armor-piercing round, not the APCR, and as with most tanks, the unlock round has a up and a down side. Now, I talked about shell types a lot already, but I think it is still a source of mistakes. And still, a lot of people will just fill up the tank with the shell type that has the highest armor penetration. And as I've said many times, I think that is a mistake, and let's use the BT-7 as another example as to why I think that. If you compare the two armor-piercing shell types for the BT-7's 45mm, you can see that the unlock round, the BR-243SB, has a higher penetration than the standard round, the BR-243, until close to 500 meters, At 500 meters and higher, the standard round has more armor penetration. So at the first look, that seems pretty simple. You use the unlock for targets below 500 meters and the standard round for targets above. But because War Thunder simulates the effect of different shell types in more detail, it is not quite as simple as that, and if you want the best result all the time, you have to take a closer look. Now, if you look at the in-game stats card for the round, it tells you the type of the shell, so you don't have to look for it in outside sources. Now, the standard round for the BT-7, the BR-243, is according to these stats an APHE-PC, or armor-piercing high-explosive round with a ballistic cap. That of course means it has an explosive filler and will explode inside the target to cause extra damage, and the ballistic cap improves the shell aerodynamic. Now, if you take a look at the unlock round, its type is much simpler. It's AP, or just armor-piercing, nothing else. That means no explosive filler and less damage when it penetrates, and it has no ballistic cap, which means a worse aerodynamic. The round slows down faster, and that is why it has less penetration at higher ranges, even though it starts out with more. So as always, you can see you want to use the unlock shells even at short range only if you face a target with enough armor to give your standard rounds trouble. If you just use them against everything, your potential damage is reduced on targets the rounds with explosive filler could penetrate anyway. That of course does not have to be the case on every tank. War Thunder goes with a more realistic approach, so if a tank gun had a new round available to it that was a simple upgrade in every way, then this is how it will be in War Thunder, and you won't have much reason to keep using the old rounds for anything. But for most vehicles it will be a trade-off to some extent. And to know if this is the case or not, you have to take a look at what kind of shell type we are talking about. So don't just go after penetration values, it is not always the best choice. Now back to the BT-7. Another characteristic of this tank is its poor turret traverse. It is a hand crank turret and it traverses at a very slow speed. Something you have to keep in mind in close range fighting, and similar to a turretless tank destroyer, you often have to move the entire tank to get on target fast enough. To summarize the BT-7 a bit, as I have already said, it is currently my favorite tank. Its mobility coupled with the, for a light tank, very decent firepower provides lots of fun. I would say the playstyle of using your speed to flank opponents and show up from unexpected directions kind of reminds me of how I imagined a fast tank destroyer like the M18 Hellcat would play in War Thunder when the Americanry will eventually get released. And if this is the case, I really look forward to trying the Hellcat. And I also think the BT-7 will be a fun tank for platoons. Playing as a fast wolfpack for example, and focus fire down an opponent and then use the speed of the tank to move the entire group to another point of the map. I think a skilled and well coordinated team with the right tactics can make a much bigger difference in a mobile tank with good firepower, like the BT-7, than in a slow and heavy but well armored tank. Because the mobility of a fast tank gives you the ability to quickly react to situations all over the map, while the firepower is still good enough to deal with said situations. I think this will be even more the case when we get maps that are designed for realistic battles and are therefore larger. That would give the tank even more room to use its mobility to its advantage. And well, that was a look at realistic battles and the BT-7 tank, and this is it for this video. As always, I hope it was entertaining, thanks for watching, and maybe I'll see you next time.